Howdy, folks. I'm Colonel Sanders, and you're not. We're going to dive right into the news today. Breaking news is that Kentucky Fried Chicken headquarters is being moved to Plano, Texas. Now, there's only one other time the Kentucky Fried Chicken headquarters was moved out of Kentucky, and that was in the 1970s when Governor John Y. Brown Jr. and Jackson Massey, owners of Kentucky Fried Chicken that purchased it from the Colonel in 1964, moved it to Nashville, Tennessee. Uncle Harley, the Colonel, was very livid over this, and he threatened to go on Johnny Carson and tell everybody how bad the food had become if they didn't move it back. As a result, Jackson Massey had resigned from the board, and he went on to do his other restaurants that he had. And Governor John Y. Brown Jr. upped Uncle Harley's salary from $45,000 a year to $75,000 a year salary, and put him on the board of directors of Food and Quality Control. So in that process, Uncle Harley had more control over the food and quality than he did after he sold in 1964. And they moved it back to Kentucky. Originally, it was in Shelbyville, Kentucky. And really, the first location for it was the Sanders Court and Cafe in Corbin, Kentucky. But in 1955, the new highway was put in. Uncle Harley was forced to sell at auction and then hit the road franchising some more to get Kentucky Fried Chicken on its feet. They then bought a home in Shelbyville, Kentucky, the Black Hall Manor, where the Claudia Sanders Dinner House stands today, which was formerly known as the Colonel's Lady before KFC Huelblind Company sued Colonel Sanders over the name the Colonel's Lady. So they moved it to Shelbyville, Kentucky, and they operated it there until 1964, and then Uncle Harley sold out, and then it was moved to Nashville, Tennessee, and then by 1970 it was moved back to Kentucky, but this time Louisville, and that's where the headquarters has been since. Now they're moving it. In my previous videos, we talked about the first initial rumors and stories I heard about it and my opinions on it. I'm now learning updatedly the KFC headquarters is only going to Plano, Texas. The things in California are other Yum Brand Corporation companies. KFC is going to Texas. Also, they're going to have a corporate office in Louisville and open up a restaurant there to ensure that Uncle Harley's legacy is still prominent in Kentucky, but it's still a sad day for all Kentuckians that take pride in it. Now, I think it's a huge mistake moving it out of Kentucky because Kentuckians take pride in the history of Kentucky Fried Chicken being born right here in Kentucky. It doesn't make sense to move it outside of Kentucky. Now, rumors say it's for tax benefits, so the corporation could avoid certain taxes in Kentucky, and they're going to open it up in Texas to further serve their customers. Now, personally, I think instead of mooching off Uncle Harley's image and trying to change him for who he is into some fake mascot, they could hire me to represent Uncle Harley's legacy and the chicken and the brand. I spent 8 years against the brand, and the corporation turned me around and changed my opinion on them when they invited my family out for a family reunion at their first location in Corbin, Kentucky. And since that day, I've been an ally of Kentucky Fried Chicken. But much like Uncle Harley, I'm going to be very critical of them. I think this is an insult to him, and they know it's an insult. That or they're completely ignorant to the history of when they did originally move it to Tennessee outside of Kentucky. He said no slick-suited B-words are going to tell him otherwise. It's Kentucky Fried Chicken, not Tennessee Fried Chicken. It's not Texas Fried Chicken. I've seen the memes. They're humorous, but it's Kentucky Fried Chicken. I do think a few years down the road, we're going to see them move it back to Kentucky, and that would be a good thing to do. I don't know what's going to happen with the museum in Louisville. I don't know what's going to happen with the location in Louisville. The basement there, my grandfather said there was a lot of young photos of Uncle Harley down in the basement that were pretty cool to look at, and they resemble a lot of these the family around today. Now, I tell you that story because we have a gentleman today that commented on Threads under News Breaking Live that said, breaking news, KFC is moving its headquarters from Kentucky to Plano, Texas, CNBC reports. Now, the first time I heard it was from the AKFC group that I'm a part of. So underneath that, we have a gentleman by the name of Chris D'Amico. I'm sorry that I can't pronounce your name right, Chris. But Chris D'Amico, point 39 says, they say this fell out of a recipe book of a certain colonel. Who can say? ? And it follows with Joe Ledington's fake Kentucky Fried Chicken leaked recipe that went viral in 2016. You can see that salt is listed as one of the 11. The colonel himself has told many members of this family and people outside the family that salt is not part of the 11. It is added to the flour after the 11 is mixed with the flour, therefore eliminating it as one of the 11 herbs and spices. You scroll down to number 4, oregano doesn't exist. I think Joe meant the right oregano. to double down on this, this is not the Colonel's handwriting, and this is not the Colonel's wife's handwriting. I don't know whose handwriting this is, but on several videos of mine, I compared the handwritings and proved that it is not the handwriting of Colonel Sanders or Claudia Price, or Claudia Sanders, if you will. None of these ingredients, other than white pepper, ground pepper, maybe garlic salt, I say garlic powder, and ginger, match what I think is in my uncle's original recipe, based on facts, based on the public listing of recipes, including Kentucky Fried Chickens, over the last 50 years that have a connection to Colonel Sanders. The recipe didn't fall out of a recipe book. It fell out of a scrapbook that Joe had for his family that had photos of him and his children with Colonel Sanders when they were younger, that had the Colonel's belt buckle, which an impersonator, Johnny Miller, said that if I were to meet Joe and get the scrapbook, that Johnny would take my uncle's belt buckle as payment. Huh? Anyways, Joe turned out to be a liar. When I tried to reach out to him after he gave me his number, and he said some things that were lies. You want to know about that? I got to go back on my YouTube channel to read about it. But he turned out to be a liar, and after that point, I made it a point to go out and see how much of this is true, how much of it is fake, and it's complete bullcrap. Many influencers have used Joe Ledington's recipe, credited him as a Sanders family member, and I'm going to tell you, no matter what any randos on the internet say, I'm a member of the Sanders family with the Sanders last name. And the Colonel's grandchildren who do not have the Sanders last name, and the Colonel's sister's grandchildren who do not have the Sanders last name, are still part of the Sanders family. We do not claim Claudia's nephews or any of their family as family of the Sanders family, because all of her family that have gone public about Colonel Sanders has spewed out nothing but lies, exaggerations, and slander. And I have evidence of this too, which you can scroll back and watch, and from that it discredits them as being truthful or honest with anything that they say, good or bad, and we do not claim them as a member of our family. Claudia was a wonderful woman, and we do claim her. But her side of the family that decided to do what they've done, especially with this recipe, we do not claim as part of the Sanders family. So those influencers are inaccurate when they say that. So we're going to go to my part. I said, that's a fake recipe. I prove it's fake in my YouTube. I meant to say on my YouTube, but autocorrect, fast thumbs. My uncle said many times salt is not part of the 11, and also look at number 4, spelled wrong, and it's not my uncle's handwriting or Claudia's. They responded with, fine, it's still a good recipe and better than what KFC serves today. Like I said, cut back on that white pepper though. I don't like it when people try to act like there's something that they're not, or that they know something that they don't. If you don't know it, just say you don't know it. I don't know it. I have a better idea than you though. I said, let me know where you get oregano from, as a playful joke towards them. And here we get, Chris is one of those people online that when they can't come with a good comeback, or they feel like they've been called out for being inaccurate, they result to just trying to hurt the Colonel's name. He says, your uncle wasn't a real colonel. My response was, he was. The Kentucky Colonels have been real since 1813 and continue to be real whether anyone agrees with it or not. It's a fact. They are real. So the news breaking of Kentucky Fried Chicken moving headquarters out of Kentucky, out of its home to Texas, has led me into several comments like this, but I wanted to point out Chris's directly because it's a perfect example. People trying to act like they know the recipe, that it's been leaked. Nobody credits my work that I've done on YouTube that I've seen. It hasn't gone viral yet. It hasn't been spread around. It's the most accurate recipe to my uncle's. Not to determine what is his recipe, but to determine whether or not these people claiming to have it are lying or full of crap. And they're just full of crap, and I proved it. So the news breaking of it, as sad as it is for Kentuckians, it's sad for me because it's my family legacy, and I know this would upset Uncle Harley, and they're not taking that into consideration. I'm not really sure what's running through their mind. I think I could do a better job representing them than anybody could today. Maybe my grandfather could do better, but I could do that with their headquarters anywhere, right? I'm an online influencer. I could do the marketing stuff. I could travel to do commercials or whatever they need me to do. I don't need to live right next to corporate. these impersonators of my uncle have moved right next to corporate, thinking that they were going to get put into commercials for them. I moved to Kentucky to be close to corporate, to give them a more incentive to work with me, and to be with family. Primarily to be with family. And also, I'm a Kentucky colonel, and I'm carrying this legacy, and I figured I ought to do it in the heartland rather than in a different state. So I moved to Kentucky because regardless of whether I work for the brand or not, I'm going to continue Uncle Harley's legacy through history and facts and with my own creativity with that too. And if the brand sees a value in that, great. If they don't, I'm still going to do it because Uncle Harley deserves the respect, and I want people to know what my family story is rather than the advertisements. And anyway, so I'm not too upset about it in the retrospect of people think that I'm upset because I moved here and they're moving away. That's not it at all. I have a great relationship with the franchisees and members of the Kentucky Fried Chicken team. I don't have a relationship with corporate yet, and I'm really open to having a relationship with corporate. But them moving it out is sad because, again, Kentucky was Kentucky Fried Chicken's home. It's where it was founded. And I know it would upset Uncle Harley. I know members of my family are going to think this is a stupid thing of them moving it, and it's not going to shock many people because they have deviated away from Uncle Harley's quality and the roots of Kentucky Fried Chicken for many years, ever since Huelblind bought it out in 1971. So it's not going to come as a shock to them. But to me, the only shock that I have is that they did this again. I mean, it did not work out in their favor. Now, Uncle Harley's not around anymore to threaten to go on Johnny Carson, who isn't around either. But I am mutuals with Stephen Colbert. And I am mutuals with many other talk show hosts and actors that run podcasts. And I am not beyond going on them and talking about my opinions and the history of moving the headquarters and what Uncle Harley would think about that. I'm not beyond doing that and bringing awareness of that. But I'm not Uncle Harley. I'm not as big as him. My voice does not hit as hard as his does. So he's not around anymore to say, I'm going to go on Stephen Colbert or some talk show host, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, Conan O'Brien. He's not around anymore to threaten to go on these talk shows and say how bad the food had become or how far away they've gone from their quality and that they shouldn't be moving it out of Kentucky. That's why they failed to move it last time, because Uncle Harley was a thorn in their side. He was a spokesperson for the brand. He made the brand. Everybody looked to him regardless what corporate said, and they knew he had a great influence. So they moved it back to Kentucky. So I don't know. I don't think I'm going to have any say, and I'm not going to threaten to go on a show and threaten how bad the food had become, because I've talked about how bad the food had become for 8 years, and then I was invited out to Corbin, and they wanted me to try their food again for the first time in 8 years, so I tried it, and I was shocked. They've done something better to the quality, and I went and tried several other franchises since then in the last 2 years, and I've been shocked because the quality has been good. So I'm not going to say their food is bad. I'm going to say that their food is good. There's some locations that are bad, and that's because of the management, but their food is not bad anymore. I don't see the bad quality that I saw back in 2010. I'm seeing better quality today. So I'm not going to threaten to go on a talk show and talk about how bad the food had become, but I will say I'll go on a talk show and talk about how Uncle Harley felt when they moved it the first time, and how I think he would feel about this time, and how I think that it's a bad idea, and how Kentuckians alike are on board. Even franchisees and employees are on board with my opinion that this is just a bad move. It might look good on paper, but it just doesn't look good for the brand itself. It's not Texas Fried Chicken. Anyway, so we went on that whole rant. We talk about Mr. Chris here and the common insult that the colonel was not a real colonel. They want to throw that at me or say I'm not a real colonel because we didn't serve in the military. Well, he did serve in the military. And while none of my family that served in the Army, in the Navy, in the Air Force made colonel status in the Army, in the military, they are still real colonels if they have been commissioned a Kentucky colonel. And we're going to go into the history here of the Kentucky colonels. So here we are on the Kentucky Colonel website. Now, let me remind you of Chris's comment since we went on a rant. Chris's comment after I said, that's a fake recipe. He says, still a good one. I joked saying, let me know where you get oregano from because it doesn't exist. And he says, your uncle wasn't a real colonel. Well, let's go into the history of the Kentucky Colonels. Let's go into it. The title Kentucky Colonel dates back to around 1813. The Kentucky militia had just returned from a highly successful campaign during the War of 1812. When the militia disbanded, Governor Isaac Shelby commissioned Charles S. Todd, one of his officers in the campaign, as an aide-de-camp on the governor's staff. Todd's official rank and grade was colonel. This has been around longer than any of us sitting here today arguing about whether Kentucky colonels are real colonels. Go down a little bit more. While early colonels actually served military roles, the position took a more ceremonial function in the late 1800s. Colonels in uniform attended functions at the governor's mansion and stood as symbolic guards at state events and the like. In the late 1920s, a group of colonels started talking about forming a society. Governor Flem Sampson gave his blessings to the project. And late one Saturday afternoon of May 1931, the first meeting of what would eventually become the Kentucky Colonels was held in Frankfort. Formulate a society to more closely band together this group into a great non-political brotherhood for advancement of Kentucky and Kentuckians, Governor Sampson challenged. And they did. Minutes of the early meeting confirmed that charitable programs were to be a central part of the organization. Social events would also play on an important role. The group held a Derby Eve dinner for the first time in 1932. Are you listening, Chris? Keeper of the Great Seal, Ruby Laffoon, who seemed to have had an innate sense, I don't know what that word means, of public relations and affinity for Hollywood stars, replaced Sampson as governor in 1932. Early on, Laffoon didn't seem to take to the idea of Kentucky Colonel Society and somewhat shunned the organization, which then was known as the Kentucky Colonels. I'm reading all this because I know you guys can't, who are insulting the history. In December of 1932, Laffoon met with Colonel Ann Bell Ward Olson, that is a long name, who owned several movie theaters across Kentucky. A representative of the theater owners nationwide, who also held a Kentucky Colonel Commission, accompanied Colonel Olson. Why didn't they call him Colonel Olson to begin with? The meeting theoretically concerned movie censorship. However, what came out of the meeting was Laffoon's commitment to the Kentucky Colonels, and in particular a new organization to be called the Kentucky Colonels. Laffoon appointed Colonel Olson as secretary and keeper of the Great Seal. Let me pause you there. Laffoon was the governor to commission Colonel Sanders for the first time as Kentucky Colonel for the contribution to the state's cuisine. Colonel Olson attacked her new position with fervor. Colonels around the world were contacted and invited to become members of the Kentucky Colonels. Social events were scheduled to coincide with the Kentucky Derby to attract as many individuals as possible. At the same time, Governor Laffoon started appointing colonels with similar zeal. Hollywood personalities such as Mae West, Bing Crosby, Fred Astaire, and W.C. Fields not only became colonels but also embraced the idea of the Kentucky Colonels. The crisis that motivated the order to make a major impact on the state came with the disastrous Great Flood of 1937. The Kentucky Colonels appointed by Sampson and Laffoon and organized by Colonel Olson went to work. New York-based colonels collected $5 from each member, the equivalent of nearly $110 today. In California, colonels such as Fred Astaire and held benefits to raise money for Kentucky. Recovery from the flood was still ongoing as the war in Europe broke out. As World War II loomed at the change of the decade, the great non-political brotherhood was again mobilized. Colonel Ann Friedman had taken over the duties of Keeper of the Great Seal from Colonel Olson. It was a job that fit her perfectly. Not even Governor Laffoon enjoyed associating with the stars and the elite business community of New York as much as Colonel Anna did. As the country prepared for war, Colonel Anna again used funds donated by these honorary Kentuckians to set up recreation rooms for soldiers training at Fort Knox. Colonels provided recreational facilities and activities for Army recruits. expenditures exceeded $100,000 and 35 recreation halls are set up at the fort. The years following the war saw the charitable side of the Kentucky Colonels grow rapidly. In 1946, colonels attending the annual Derby Eve Colonels Banquet pledged money to help start the Kentucky Country Doctors Fund. Today, the fund is known more politically correct as the Rural Kentucky Medical Scholarships Fund. It has helped hundreds of physicians attend medical school in return for a promise to practice in rural areas of the state. Kentucky's first cancer treatment center and the Lion's Eye Research Center continue to serve Kentucky, and the Kentucky Colonels funded both in a large part. Colonels continue to contribute dollars to the goal of benefiting Kentucky and Kentuckians. Since 1951, as an IRS-recognized 501c3 charity, the Kentucky Colonels has distributed over 8,000 grants to charitable and educational agencies across Kentucky. For the last dozen years, the Kentucky Colonels Board of Trustees have distributed approximately $2.3 million each year, impacting the lives of more than 3.9 million people in and around Kentucky. Over 8,000 grants, $2.3 million, 3.9 million people to the charitable and educational agencies all across Kentucky. This year, someone in every country in the state will be touched by a program funded by the voluntary tax-deductible contributions of the Kentucky Colonels living in every state in the nation, and colonels living in 76 nations abroad. So, Colonel, next time you meet a fellow Kentucky Colonel, you can assume you are with a kindred spirit, someone like you who goes that extra step in kindness, goodwill, and pride in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Now, I will argue that because I have nominated people for Kentucky Colonel that use me for my colonel status to get them the Kentucky Colonel title, that now impersonate my uncle and slander me to try to get me out of the picture so they can impersonate the colonel, and people looked at them as the big historian or whatever. But for the most part, Kentucky Colonels are good people. So, Chris, what do you think? Are you still going to say my uncle wasn't a real colonel? Because I believe you're trying to insult him and saying he's not a military colonel. I don't care about that. I know he served during the second occupation of Cuba and was dishonorably discharged from the army. He wasn't a colonel, he was a wagoner. He became a Kentucky colonel in the 1930s. He received 2 commissions. He lost his first one, was commissioned a second time, took it more seriously, donned on the suit and the goatee, and went to work. Let's look at our famous colonels. Right off the bat, you see Aaron Lee Cummings. That is my cousin, the colonel's nephew, on his sister's side. We're going to scroll down a little bit more. There's a lot of people here that are famous Kentucky colonels. They're real colonels, like it or not. Dave Thomas, founder of Wendy's, worked with Colonel Sanders. Duncan Hines, responsible for reviewing the Sanders Quarter and Cafe, giving an excellent review, which brought in a lot of tourism to Corbin, Kentucky, of which Ruby Laffoon then commissioned Colonel Sanders, Harlan David Sanders, as a Kentucky colonel for his contribution to the state's cuisine. Duncan Hines is responsible for that. I'm going to keep scrolling a little bit more. Lieutenant Dan. And right there, Uncle Harley, Harlan Sanders, entrepreneur, Kentucky colonel, one of the most famous ones, if I might say. One day I hope to be on this list. If Kentucky Fried Chicken never hires me, it'll be a little harder for me to be on this list because I have to reach over 1 million followers on YouTube in order to get that, or 2 million followers on TikTok or Instagram in order to qualify for what I do as a influencer to be put on the famous colonels listing, because I have applied for it. And although I have reached previous requirements for it, I have to reach the new requirements for it, and I do plan on doing that with or without KFC's help. But Chris, what do you think? Do you know more about the Kentucky Colonels? Do you want to be a Kentucky Colonel? Do you think that you will turn around your life in insulting or trying to just get one up on someone else by trying to say Colonel Sanders wasn't a real colonel? My bad, I'll quote you exactly. Your uncle wasn't a real colonel. This is a very real thing. Matter of fact, it's so real. I don't just have a challenge coin for people who think that I'm not a Kentucky colonel. I have a brass membership card for being a Kentucky colonel, and I'd show you my other membership card, but I don't feel like blurring out the membership number on it. But I have been a Kentucky Colonel since 2015. That's a whole decade now, 10 years. I've learned a lot. I learned a lot about my duties as a colonel, and I take them very seriously. So next time you want to insult Colonel Sanders, posting a fake recipe, do your research on it first. Heck, go to my YouTube channel. I'll show you what I think it is based on facts and where you could go to look yourself so you could compare it and not even question whether that piece of paper is it or not. All right. Ciao.